person. How does one choose the right person in one's life? Campbell, your heart tells you it ought to. Your inner being, that's the mystery. You recognize your other self? Well, I don't know, but there's a flash that comes, and something in you knows that this is the one. Moyers. If marriage is this reunion of the self, with the male or female grounding of ourselves, why is it that marriage is so precarious in our modern society? Because it's not regarded as a marriage, says Campbell. I would say that if the marriage isn't a first priority in your life, you're not married. That is, the way to know that the person is right is through some absolutely powerful intuition. You don't check his bank account, and you don't check the family. Do you understand? The way to truth. This is romantic, by the way. This is not the rationalists would not accept this technique for unions. All right, this is very romantic. The way to the truth is through intuition. Principle 2. Principle 2 is that if you use your intuitions, your reason will never be able to tell you this, because reason is accustomed to chopping things up into pieces and analyzing them. So reason can do analysis, but reason really can't do synthesis for you. If you want synthesis, you're going to have to use your intuition, and if you use your intuition, ultimately what you come to understand is that everything in the world is connected. Let me put it this way. It is part of the rational mode to think of consciousness as being something peculiar to the head, that the head is the organ originating consciousness. It isn't. The head is an organ that inflects consciousness in a certain direction or to a certain set of purposes. But there is a consciousness here in the body. The whole living world is informed by consciousness. I have a feeling that consciousness and energy are the same thing somehow. Where you really see life energy, there's consciousness. Certainly the vegetable world is conscious. And when you live in the woods, as I did as a kid, you can see all these different consciousnesses relating to themselves. There is a plant consciousness and there is an animal consciousness, and we share both these things. You can eat certain foods, and the bile knows where there's something there for you to work on. The whole process is consciousness. Trying to interpret in simply mechanistic, rational terms won't work. He's saying something very important. He's saying if you use your reason, then we cannot feel a fundamental connection with other things. I mean, to say a vegetable is conscious is ridiculous. But if you use your feeling and your intuition, then ultimately what you sense is that consciousness is not something confined to the human nervous system or to animal nervous systems. Consciousness is a force that pervades what? Everything. And that can only be known intuitively. And ultimately, underneath all things that seem to be separate from each other, there is a connecting link. And that connecting link is consciousness. By the way, Jung, who was a disciple of Freud, and certainly is one of the father leaders of New Age thinking, said that we are born with two unconsciousnesses. One is personal, which contains the memories of our own personal life, and the other is collective, which we have inherited from our animal past and which unites us to all other living things in the universe. New Age thinking says that ultimately what we discover is that we are greater than ourselves. The rational answer says you are a person You have a nervous system and a brain. Ultimately, it will die, it will decay, and then you will be through. The spiritual answer says that isn't true. Intuitively, I know that my mind is part of some greater mind that pervades the world. That greater mind is not the God necessarily of the Bible, the stern God of the Bible. It's not necessarily the Allah of the Quran. But it is a force that gives me ultimately my immortality. Because if my mind is part of a greater mind that pervades the universe, even if my small mind in some way perishes, or my body perishes, my small mind will be absorbed into the greater mind and the greater consciousness. New Age thinking says that if this consciousness is to be found in nature, then everything around us is part of God. Now, we call that idea pantheism. It's a very interesting idea. Pantheism is different from traditional religion. Traditional religion said God is somewhere else and we'll get there. Pantheism says no. God is right here in the nature that we experience. And what I'd like to do is to read to you the answer of Chief Seattle. Chief Seattle was an Indian whose land was ultimately seized by the American government. They contacted him to buy the land from the Indians. And he gave an answer that would be difficult for a Christian, Jew, or Muslim to give. Here is his answer. Chief Seattle was one of the last spokesmen of the Paleolithic moral order. In about 1852, the United States government acquired about so much of tribal lands for the arriving people of the United States. And Chief Seattle wrote a marvelous letter in reply. His letter expresses the moral, really, of our whole discussion. The president in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land, says the chief. But how can you buy or sell the sky? The land, the idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of this earth is sacred to my people. Every shining needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect, all are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth, and it is part of us. The perfume flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle, these are our brothers. The rocky crest, the juices in the meadow, the body heat of the pony and man all belong to the same family. God and divinity is not far away. God and divinity are right here next to my touch. Do you understand? The sunshine, the air, the beauties of nature, they are indeed divine, and divinity infuses them all. So, it is not true that God is supernatural. That's what tradition says. God is perfectly natural, and even if you don't believe in a supernatural world, do you understand? Even if you don't believe in a supernatural world, if you can only appreciate the sacredness of nature. By the way, in an age in which the environmental movement has emerged, this answer has what? Enormous, by the way, enormous, enormous power. Nature does not exist for us simply to exploit for human use. It has its own sacredness of which we are a part, and we must respect it. New Age thinking says that we are part of Gaia. You ever heard the word Gaia? Oh, that's the new idea. It's a New Age thinking thing. Gaia is the name of the Greek goddess of the earth. And the portrait of Gaia generally is the planet, like seen from the moon, the picture of the planet in this kind of blue setting. And the theory of Gaia is that the earth is not simply an inanimate object with nature on the top and with human beings at the top of nature. But rather, the world in itself is what? A living organism. And we're all tied together. And the organism as a whole, which is Gaia, is holy and is sacred. If we're purely rational, we will exploit this world to our own destruction. The only way we can save ourselves is to experience what? The sacredness and the holiness of nature. The New Age thinking says that heaven is not a place out there. Heaven is inside of us, and certainly that comes from the influence of Eastern religion. The message is, and heaven, that desired goal of most people, is within us. Yes, heaven and hell are within us, and all the gods are within us. This is the great realization of the Upanishads of India in the 9th century BC. All the gods, all the heavens, all the worlds are within us. They are magnified dreams, and dreams are manifestations in image form of the energies of the body in conflict with each other. That is, if you want to find God, don't look out there. If you want to find God, look within. Because your human soul, your human consciousness is only part of the greater mind that is God. So, in answer to all those rationalists who say you can't prove that God exists, well, you can't prove that a supernatural God out there exists. You can't. But what the romantic New Age answer says is you don't have to do that. All you need to do is what? Look within, feel within. God is something felt and intuited within you. It's not something to be discovered rationally out there through proofs. New Age thinking says that the task of life, the purpose of life, is to find our assignment. How do you find your assignment? Well, one way to find your assignment traditionally was to check the Bible. I'll read the Bible. That'll give me my assignment. The problem with that is the Bible has only one assignment for everybody. And what many people feel and discover is that it may be good for somebody else, but not for them. And who is this person or authority out there to tell me how I should lead my life? One way to find the assignment, of course, is to go to your psychotherapist, who then talks about how you can adjust yourself to reality and become a successful person in your society. But the New Age answer is, the way I find my assignment ultimately is to get in touch with my true humanity. Now, New Age thinking maintains generally, most of the New Age proclaimers, that way down deep inside within us, way down deep inside our unconscious. We are born with an assignment. And our assignment is shared with other people, since we are all human. And our assignment is also individual, because each of us is a what? Is an individual. And that is expressed, by the way, in something that appears in The Power of Myth. Here. Joe Campbell is very much influenced by Star Wars. Because he sees Star Wars as a kind of modern myth that somehow or other describes the spiritual search of modern men and women. And here's Moyers. I think that explains in part the success of Star Wars. It wasn't just the production value that made such an exciting film to watch. It was that it came along at a time when people needed to see in recognizable images the clash of good and evil. They needed to be reminded of idealism, to see a romance based upon selflessness rather than selfishness. Campbell. The fact that the evil power is not identified with any specific nation on this earth means you've got an abstract power which represents a principle, not a specific historical situation. When the mask of Darth Vader is removed, you see an unformed man, one who is not developed as a human individual. What you see is a strange and pitiful sort of undifferentiated face. What's the significance of that, asked Moyer. Campbell. Darth Vader has not developed his own humanity. He's a robot. He's a bureaucrat, living not in terms of himself, but in terms of an imposed system. This is the threat to our lives that we all face today. Is the system going to flatten you out and deny you your humanity, or are you going to be able to make use of the system to the attainment of human purposes? How do you relate to the system so that you are not compulsively serving it? The thing to do is to learn to live in your period of history as a human being. That's something else, and it can be done. Most of the time, we are what our society demands of us and what tradition demands of us. And we don't listen to the voice within. To discover our humanity, we have to what? Listen to the voice within. If we do that, what we will discover is that we have our own assignment, and that assignment means not only that we pursue our own happiness, but that ultimately we have a moral sensitivity to the welfare of other people. And therefore, no matter what the outer society dictates, we ourselves, by our own personal decision, dissent and do what is necessary. New Age thinking says that the mind, the consciousness, has extraordinary power. See, the rational answer is always the following. If your mind is a function of your nervous system and your brain, that's all, then ultimately, when something happens to your nervous system and your brain that's organic, it will affect your mind, and there's nothing you can do about it. That is, organic trouble means mental trouble. And it doesn't go both ways. But New Age thinking is the movement, by the way, that has built around itself around holistic thinking. Holistic thinking, of course, is a movement that developed in the 60s and through the 70s and the 80s, which said, or says, that mind and body are united. And it's a two-way street. Not only does the body affect the mind, but the mind affects the body, and the reason why the mind affects the body is that the mind has a reality all its own. And therefore, your mind can affect the quality of your body. If your mind is depressed, your body will be ill. And if your mind is hopeful, your body may what? regenerate itself. And that, of course, is Bernie Siegel and Norman Cousins. And I want to read to you from the last book by Norman Cousins. All right. Not all the patients I encountered were referred by their physicians. Each day there would be upward of 10 telephone calls, most of them from patients who were at a low ebb emotionally, were reaching out for help. Not infrequently, the calls came from family members. Particularly memorable was a telephone call to my house from a woman in Pittsburgh who telephoned me at about 5 o'clock a.m. "I need your help," she began. "My sister intends to get married. They're about to send out the wedding invitations. It's weird. What are they going to do? Send out invitations to the same list a few months later for funeral services? My sister has cancer. There's not much hope. She's not being realistic. Maybe if you speak to her, it might make a difference. I know she's been a subscriber to the Saturday Review, of which he was the editor, and has read some of your books. You can really help us. Does your sister know she has advanced cancer? Yes. Does her fiancé know that she has advanced cancer? Yes. And they still want to get married? Yes." I said I would be glad to telephone her sister, which I did, but I didn't deliver the requested message. Instead, I congratulated the sister and told her how inspired I was by her decision to get on with her life and to reach out for the best. I said I had the utmost admiration for her and her fiancé and wished them both well, and the couple proceeded with their wedding plans. The wedding took place as scheduled. The woman went into remission. Once or twice a year, I would telephone the woman to inquire about her health. After 10 years, she is still in complete remission. Her physician says it is difficult to convince him that her decision to move ahead resolutely didn't have something to do with the retreat of the cancer. New Age thinking means that I give proper status to the mind. Underneath the material world, pervading it, all right, coincident with it is the power of mind, which is not confined simply to me, but pervades the very world. And the mind that I have, which is part of the great collective consciousness, has enormous power, and if only I will use that mind and the power of that mind, I will also be able to discipline body. New Age thinking says that bliss is now. See, one of the problems, by the way, with the traditional answer was, you're going to get it later. But most people today, by the way, don't want to wait. No, that's part of the. It's one of the reasons why traditional answers don't work. And when somebody says, well, at one time, like in 1362, you could say to somebody, well, you're going to have to suffer for about 65 years, and then you're going to get, you're going to get your reward. People no longer find that acceptable. And so what's interesting about New Age thinking, and certainly Joseph Campbell himself articulates it, is to say that not only is heaven here, heaven is now. And let me just read that to you. In classic Christian doctrine, the material world is to be despised and life is to be redeemed in the hereafter in heaven where our rewards come. But you say that if you affirm that which you deplore, you are affirming the very world which is our eternity at the moment. Yes, that is what I am saying. Eternity isn't some later time. Eternity isn't even a long time. Eternity has nothing to do with time. Eternity is that dimension of here and now that all thinking in temporal terms cuts off. And if you don't get it here and now, you won't get it anywhere and any time. The problem with heaven is that you will be having such a good time there you won't even think of eternity. You'll just have this unending delight in the beatific vision of God. What he's saying is, your experience of heaven is now. Abraham Maslow, who's a semi-romantic thinker, called it the peak experience. The peak experience is when you go out for a weekend and you're standing on the beach and you're looking at the water rolling in and the sun setting, and all of a sudden you have this absolutely, do you understand, overwhelming experience of the beauty of the world and how everything is connected, and you feel you're part of the water and the sun and the whole thing, well, that's heaven. Heaven isn't later. Heaven is the way you see the world right now. Most of the time, says Campbell and others, in the rat race of life, you only see the world in pieces. But sometimes you give yourself the time to feel the world as a whole and to feel your connection. And when you do, in those moments, that's heaven. Heaven isn't some far-off place, far-away place. New Age thinking says, certainly in the words of Campbell, follow your bliss. What does it mean to follow your bliss? Well, I want to just read this one thing to you because I think it's wonderful. And it describes what he means. And this is, remember the last line, I have never done the thing that I wanted to in all my life. That is a man who never followed his bliss. Well, I actually heard that line when I was teaching at Sarah Lawrence. Before I was married, I used to eat out in the restaurants of town for my lunch and dinners. Thursday night was the maid's night off in Bronxville, so that many of the families were out in restaurants. One fine evening, I was in my favorite restaurant there, and at the next table there was a father, a mother, and a scrawny boy, about 12 years old, and the father said to the boy, drink your tomato juice. And the boy said, I don't want to. Then the father, with a louder voice, said, drink your tomato juice. And the mother said, don't make him do what he doesn't want to do. And the father looked at her and said, he can't go through life doing what he wants to do. If he does only what he wants to do, he'll be dead. Look at me. I've never done a thing I wanted to do in all my life. And I thought, my God, there's Babbitt incarnate. That's the man who never followed his bliss. You may have success in life, but then just think of it. What kind of life was it? What good was it? You've never done the thing you wanted to do in all your life. I always tell my students, go where your body and soul want you to go. Now that's very radical. He's saying, don't listen to your clergyman. Don't listen to your doctor. Don't listen to anybody who tells you to do what you feel inside, Jonathan, you don't really want to do. And even though people mock you when you say, this is what I want to do, I feel very, very deeply, this is my purpose in life, this is what I need to do, and other people say, you're crazy, you follow, do you understand? Your bliss. What do you rely on? You don't rely on your reason. If you relied on your reason, you would what? Stop it immediately. You don't rely on your faith, because if you did that, you would listen to most likely your conventional clergyman and you wouldn't do what you were going to do. You listen to yourself. It's very radical. It's the most non-traditional advice ever given. Do you understand? There are no experts who can tell you what to do. Now that, by the way, means that you as an individual have to find your own answer. And now I want to talk about Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti was one of the guru leaders in the early part of the century. And he was adored and loved. He was born and raised in India and ultimately came to the West. And let me give you what he has to say here, because it's very important. I say again that I have no disciples. Every one of you is a disciple of the truth if you understand the truth and do not follow individuals. The only manner of attaining truth is to become disciples of the truth without a mediator. There is no understanding in the worship of personalities. I still maintain that all ceremonies are unnecessary for spiritual growth. In this way, he differs from Campbell. If you would seek the truth, you must go out far away from the limitations of the human mind and heart and there discover it. Is it not much simpler to make life itself the goal, life itself the guide, than to have mediators, gurus who must inevitably step down the truth and hence betray it? Do not quote me afterwards as an authority. I refuse to be your crutch. I am not going to be brought into a cage for your worship. When you bring the fresh air of the mountain and hold it in a small room, the freshness of that air disappears and there is stagnation. As I am free, as I have found my truth, which is limitless without beginning or end, I will not be conditioned by you. What he's saying is, I am your teacher, but I'm what? Only your guide. Don't worship me or revere me, because ultimately what? You have to come to your own answer. And the true guru, the true guide, the person who helps you on your spiritual journey to your assignment, can only give you what? Guidance, help you along the way. He can't give you the answer. You have to find the answer for yourself. And last, and perhaps the most crucial thing, because it deals with the meaning of life. New thinking says that in the end, if I take my journey and go along the way, what I ultimately do is I say yes to life. Now, rational people don't say yes to life. Rational people say, well, this looks good, yes. That looks rotten, no. This looks good, yes. That looks rotten, no. This looks good, yes. That looks rotten, no. You say yes, no, yes, no. Because the world as a whole is not good, because sometimes there is justice and sometimes what? There is no justice. But New Age thinking says, it's rather interesting, Joe Campbell points this out, and so do others. There are two ways of looking at the world. One way is what we call the ethical way. The ethical way of looking at the world is when we live our normal lives and we're struggling to survive, and obviously there are forces in our way that frustrate our needs and frustrate the needs of others, and we say good, bad, right, wrong. But then there is what he calls the way that comes at the end of the spiritual journey. When ultimately you follow your journey, you take your feelings and your intuitions to the very end, then what you develop is a kind of perspective. What you ultimately end with is not your own personal mind, but you see the world through the mind of God. And when you do, what you recognize is that what happens in the world is what happens in the world, and when all put together, is all right. Which is to say, the world as a whole is all right. Although it does not appear to be just on the lower level. Do you understand? On the higher level, when I can really sort of detach myself from my own personal problems and sort of go deep within myself and make contact with that ultimate reality, what I discover is that it's all right. And in fact, I want to conclude with that because Joseph Campbell says that in his book. What about this idea of good and evil in mythology, of life as a conflict between the forces of darkness and the forces of light? Campbell, that is a Zoroastrian idea which has come over into Judaism and Christianity. In other traditions, good and evil are relative to the position in which you are standing. What is good for one is evil for the other. And you play your part, not withdrawing from the world when you realize how horrible it is. All life is sorrowful, is the first Buddhist saying, and so it is. It wouldn't be life if there were not temporality involved, which is sorrow, loss. You've got to say yes to life and see it as magnificent this way, for this is surely the way God intended it. We have not created the world as it is. We simply discover ourselves in this world. And when we're caught up in our own rat race, we see the world often as painful, unjust, and meaningless. But if we take the spiritual journey, not through traditional religion, if we take the spiritual journey through our own selves, then ultimately what we discover is that it's all right. Do you understand? And that's a personal discovery, a personal intuition. In fact, Carl Gustav Jung said, one of the New Age thinkers, although he wasn't around when New Age as a movement developed, the best time of life to discover the truth is not when you're young and you're running around in the rat race. The best time of life to discover the truth is when you're older, when you're more detached from things, when you've proven yourself, and you don't have to keep proving yourself over and over again. And then you can take that spiritual journey, and then you can have that detachment, and then you can see the world, in a sense, from the spiritual perspective as opposed to your personal perspective. And then what used to be a no becomes a yes. What does New Age thinking say to the question, the meaning of life? It says, yes. Yes. There is harmony and justice in the world, even though we may not personally on the lowest level be able to discern it. Yes. I do have an assignment. Not one given to me by the Bible or by my religious institution, but one born into me, which I must discover. Yes, I am immortal, maybe not in the conventional way where, I go to heaven, but I am part of a greater mind and greater consciousness which pervades this universe. Yes, I have the power to achieve my happiness because if I only train my mind, I will be able to do it. I want to conclude by simply saying that this answer is the fastest growing answer in America. It's growing faster than any traditional religion is declining in number. Fundamentalism is holding its own. Traditional religion is declining in number, and this is the fastest growing answer. It's much faster growing than existentialism. And it's faster growing than the rational answers that have been around for a long, long time. And if you want to know how I feel about it, then as I mentioned last week, I'm going to go next week to give the libertarian answer. And then in the last session, I will go over, do you understand, all the answers and somehow give you my personal feeling and response to this. But I wanted you to understand the message of New Age thinking. Thank you very, very much.